Yo, what's up, everyone? This is Adam Hudson here. Today is Monday, October 27th, 2025. Real Sankara Hours. Another solo episode of mine, these Adam's Riffs. Basically, these are some fireside chat style solo episodes where, I just, talk about, basically say what's on my mind. What's going on in the world today. Like I said, if you're new here, if you're a new listener, this is Real Sankara Hours, Pan-African socialist political podcast, where we talk about news, current events, things going on in the world from a Pan-African left perspective. Um, naturally, today, what I want to talk about is a little bit different, even though mostly this podcast we talk about news, politics, current events, world affairs, black politics, things of that nature. I'm going to do something different. I want to talk about music. So, the theme of this episode, the focus of it really is I'm going to, one, pay homage to the late singer D'Angelo, and also talk about essentially something that's been on my mind for a while, which is how computers, particularly digital audio production technology, how the overabundance of it has sucked a lot of the soul out of music. And I'm going to contextualize. I'm going to basically talk about an article in the New York Times that was published a couple months ago, back in June. The title is "In the Age of the Algorithm, Roots Music is Rising. Streaming services are helping revive America's most old-fashioned undigital genre." I am also a musician, so something I'm doing differently with my solo episodes, as you heard here. I have intro music and outro music, the outro you'll obviously hear at the end. But I'm a drummer slash percussionist. I play the djembe, which is a West African drum, which is that's the drum you heard in the intro. That's what I'm playing. And then in the outro, playing my drum kit. So I play drum kit, djembe. Those are my main instruments. I also play congas, bongos. The term I prefer to call myself is percussionist slash drummer. So drummer slash percussionist. But really, to use a more technical term, I'm a percussionist. Been playing drums for almost 13 years at this point. 13 years, around there. Black music runs in my family. Uncles are musicians. My great uncle, Bob Perkins, was a very famous, kind of locally known jazz radio host in Philadelphia. He passed away not too long ago, or earlier this year. So, black music runs in my family. And so I wanted to talk about, basically this is going to be, talking about music commentary. But first off, I will talk about basically D'Angelo. So, D'Angelo, his real name was Michael Eugene Archer. He was a very famous R&B singer, songwriter, and composer and multi-instrumentalist. He was very talented. Sadly, about 2 weeks ago, October 14th, he passed away after a private battle with pancreatic cancer. And there have been a lot of like, kind of tributes to him, and one thing what I want to talk about, well, I don't want to act like I was a diehard fan of D'Angelo. I was obviously familiar with him, so like not living under a fucking rock. But I was obviously familiar with D'Angelo's work. Um, I wouldn't say I was a diehard fan. That's not because I don't like his music. I do like his music, but just like recently, like before he passed away, I had been listening to his acoustic demos of many of his songs, and I was just mesmerized because I when I listened to it, particularly the song Spanish Joint, where he played it on piano. That was essentially the demo of the song. Before obviously it was on his probably his most famous album. I believe it's let me double check. I believe that song is on, it's on Voodoo. Yeah, it's on Voodoo. Yep. Yeah, his probably his most well-known, one of his most well-known albums is Voodoo, which came out in 2000, January 25th, 2000. Spanish Joint. I was listening to Spanish Joint and Africa, the acoustic demos he did. And then before I recorded this episode, I was listening to his first album, Brown Sugar. I was listening to a couple songs from that album. But particularly his acoustic demos, I was mesmerized by how talented of a piano player he was. There was a live performance he did with Questlove, where he did a cover of let me find it. Hold on. It's I believe it's Will You. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Do You Still Care? It's a cover of Tell Me If You Still Care. So the original song is by SOS Band, and D'Angelo did a cover of that song on piano. I think it might be worth. I don't think I'll get in a copyright infringement if I upload it. Maybe a snippet of it on this. Actually, right around here, I'll upload a snippet of the song so you guys can hear it. Obviously, it's fair use, so I don't want to get any like copyright dings. But I'm not gonna upload the whole performance in the link. I'll share it. But right here, actually, I'll play a little bit of the performance starting here.
If you still care about me, tell me if you still care about me. Let me know how you started to lose your love for me. My heart knows that you're my number one. You feel the same way too. If we still care about me, you still care? If you still care about me, yes, I know that I still love you. You're forever on my mind.
Anyway, I remember hearing that years ago, and I was like, "Fuck, it's so good. It is so fucking good." And I had a similar feeling when I heard Spanish Joint, because I was like, when I heard that, I was like, God damn! I was just the Spanish Joint acoustic demo, which I'm not gonna play it in this episode, but I'll put a link to it. But if you listen to it, like the melody, the oh my god, like that, the acoustic demo of him just playing the song of Spanish Joint on piano, I'm like, whoa, this guy is so good. And I really, for this episode, this is the main thing where I want to give D'Angelo his flowers, because, and I think it's something that in the retrospectives and tributes I've seen paid to D'Angelo, it doesn't get emphasized enough how much of a talented composer he was. Because a lot of the songs that he was basically the principal composer. He wrote the melody and the structure of the song, and then for his albums, there'd be other musicians who would play the parts and flesh it out into like a full song. But a lot of times when I've heard people talk about D'Angelo, it's usually, obviously, he's a very great singer, beautiful voice, and the themes he talked about. Also, what he was also known for, this is how I remember him, is when the music video of his song Untitled, How Does It Feel? That music video is him shirtless, semi-naked, and the way it was shot, he had pants on, but they were so low that like it was toward like his lower groin, but not showing obviously him full nude, but it's very suggestive. So anyway, I remember when that that music video came out, it caused a stir. I remember that. And that apparently when I was reading about it, D'Angelo didn't really like the reaction to it, because he felt, along with the music video director, they both felt that the theme that they were trying to get across, it went over people's heads. And for anyone who probably doesn't remember when that song came out, either maybe perhaps you're too young, or maybe you're a millennial who was in middle school when that song came out, but like perhaps you weren't paying attention to D'Angelo's music or that music video. But around that time, to contextualize when that song came out, a lot of the songs that were popular during that time were, well, for example, Cisco's Thong Song, that was huge. I believe Ray J, he came out, one of his songs came out like maybe 2 years after this song came out. So, and then there were boy bands like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. So those are the kind of top male singers who were popular around that time. And so I think he got because of how suggestive that music video was, he, I think, got kind of lumped in with that crowd. Like basically another sexy black male R&B crooner, and that's not who he was. So apparently he got a lot of unwanted sexual attention at live shows, and um it really it really kind of hurt him mentally. So got he got it sent him down the path of drug addiction and stuff like that, and that's why he didn't release his next album, Black Messiah, like basically almost 15 years after, because Black Messiah came out in December 2014, and Voodoo came out in January 2000. So it's almost a 15-year gap between his second album and his third album. And what I want to do is to pay homage to him, and then talk about this article and the evolution of recorded music, and why I think, and it's something I've been thinking for a long time, is that I think a lot of the basically the human element of a lot of music is being edited out, and it's to the point where now AI is able to make music. So I want to talk about the history of recorded music, the history of African American music, and where D'Angelo fits in that. Anyway, now where D'Angelo, well, actually, first of all, let me round out my point when it comes to just my thoughts about him. I think that D'Angelo was a great fucking composer. Like I said, what really drew me to him, like listening to him more recently, and listening to just him as a piano player, I'm just like, I love his piano playing. And it's just coming from someone like, piano is not my main instrument, but that's the first instrument I ever played. And I do credit piano for helping me become a drummer and a percussionist. I don't think he gets enough props and praise for how great of a piano player and a composer he was, because he really was. He was a great. I think he was a great songwriter, great composer, a great piano player, and just yeah. So rest in peace to D'Angelo. My condolences to his family. But he has definitely left a legacy within the trajectory of black music. Now, with that said, I'll start with this: the genre he's classified in, and then kind of work backward from there. He is classified typically as neo soul, so like R&B / neo soul, and so the neo soul, that movement, that genre, includes people like Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill, Maxwell, who else? Believe, hold on, like, oh yeah, Jill Scott, Jay Dilla, Raphael Sadiq. There you go. That's very important. Very important name to mention. Who else? So neo soul, it comes from a collective called the Soulquarians, who they were active in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was initially formed by D'Angelo and Questlove and producer rapper Jay Dilla. Then later on, people like Erykah Badu, James Poyser, Roy Hargrove, Bilal, Q-Tip, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Common, Pino Palladino, um, they were all part of this, basically this collective, um, and the term was coined by, I believe, who was it? Oh, Kadar Mossenberg. He was the one who coined the term neo soul, and a lot of people who were classified as that, they didn't really like the term that much. And so neo soul, what is neo soul? I mean, I'll be honest, I have an issue with the term as well, because when I hear those artists, I hear just soul music, R&B soul music, but with more modern production. That's what I hear. Neo soul, when it came out, when those artists became popular, like when they were big, they had to compete with the dominance of hardcore gangster rap and a style of R&B that was basically merged with hip hop. So the producer, I believe is Teddy Riley. That's the producer. There you go. Teddy Riley. He was responsible for the creation of New Jack Swing, which is a fusion of R&B and hip hop, and that style of music was pretty was more popular from the late 90s to the late 80s to the early 90s. New Jack Swing. Before that, hip hop, rap hip hop, and R&B were considered separate. There wasn't much overlap between the two. So, which from today's perspective may seem weird, because I think a lot of people, when they think of rap, hip hop, and R&B, they think of those terms as synonymous, which they aren't. But Teddy Riley, he was the one who created New Jack Swing, which was a merger of R&B and hip hop. So from that, even though like New Jack Swing, went out of popularity, I think the influence of Teddy Riley and New Jack Swing is that R&B and rap music became further merged, and so R&B went away from what it traditionally was, singers and live instrumentalists. The musicality of R&B was borrowing a lot from hip hop, and hip hop, as a genre of music, the music is based on sampling older records. So sampling older records and drum machines. That's something that hip hop pioneered in terms of popularity, was particularly the use of the turntable as an instrument. These days, in a lot of rap music, you don't hear like DJs scratching, but they'll like, that's the sound of placing your hand on a vinyl record on a turntable and moving it, and the needle would make this scratching sound. So that's something that I think hip hop was innovative in, was turning the turntable into an actual instrument and making it part of music. So, but yeah, hip hop, rap music as a genre of music, the emphasis is not on people playing live instruments and someone rapping. It's basically someone rapping, and the musical instrumentals are essentially the vast majority of rap music, particularly from the 80s through the 90s, even the 2000s. The vast majority of a lot of rap was based on sampled music. Even today, a lot of rap music still uses samples. So anyway, in comes neo soul, and they emphasize live instruments. Now, particularly like Questlove and the Roots, they're a hip hop group, but they emphasize live instruments. So that's something that was innovative. So that's one of the big things I think with neo soul, that made it different from the black music, particularly R&B and hip hop at that time, was that you had people playing. The music was emphasized by the music was performed by human beings playing instruments versus uh, sampled music in drum machines. And D'Angelo himself was heavily influenced by older soul music, particularly from the 70s, old funk, R&B, and soul music. I This is just me personally. I think a better term to call this movement is more progressive soul rather than neo soul, because when I hear D'Angelo's music, I just hear like this is soul music, but just, you know, the only thing that makes a difference is the production quality has changed from the 70s, right? It's the 70s production quality is going to sound different because the you're using just different gear to record music. So with progressive soul, there's a recording of live instruments, but with better production quality. So anyway, I personally prefer the term progressive soul to classify um, this genre of music. So that is, yeah, that is essentially D'Angelo's style of music. That's something he helped to pioneer, and we can see the influence even today. Like I think today's like, for example, Janelle Monáe, for example. I think I would classify her as like progressive soul R&B. Um, yeah, yeah, definitely progressive soul R&B. Um, Her music I think is pretty experimental. Um, and speaking of which, I would also say the music of progressive soul and people like D'Angelo is heavily influenced by older soul music, but it's a little more, um, I would say, left of center and experimental in terms of um, influences it's willing to borrow from, and particularly the themes that the artists talk about when it comes to their songs. You know, socially conscious topics, the black experience, bohemianism, Afrofuturism, left wing progressive politics. Um, you contrast that with, again, think of the time period that progressive soul / quote unquote neo soul came out, late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of the rap music was essentially hardcore hip hop, gangster rap music, right? So the themes and topics that progressive soul touches on is different than a lot of the hardcore hip hop of that time. So I think progressive. The best way to think of this genre of music is more progressive soul, because in terms of lyrics and themes they tend to talk about in the music, and I think musically and sonically, it's a little more experimental, left to center in a way, which, again, a more contemporary person to think of under this category would be someone like Janelle Monáe, I think. So anyway, now let me bring up this article. Let me segue to this article and then talk about the history of both recorded music and Black American music, because I do think that what I thought was interesting about this article is that I think there is a growing hunger among people for music performed by human beings, people playing live instruments, because so much of the music, particularly from like the late 2000s up to now, like a lot of the music of the past 20 years, a lot of it has been much more hyper produced, um, and more, I wouldn't even just say electronic based, but I would just say in terms of the production, like I said, computers have taken over the production end of music to the point where a lot of what people are hearing with a lot of modern music, um, a lot of ways you're not actually hearing real people. You're hearing uh human beings edited out of music, and something much more hyper produced because of the um honestly just a better digital audio technology to record music. Anyway, so this New York Times article that came out June 3rd, 2025 by Carlo Rotella, the title is In the Age of the Algorithm, Roots Music is Rising. Streaming services are helping revive America's most old-fashioned undigital genre. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read a couple passages from it, like I typically do with articles like this that are this long. But basically, this article talks about the rise of roots music. So really, to specify, roots music as in country music and bluegrass. Country music is making a resurgence. Anyway, let me see. Where should I start this? Where should I start reading? Here we go. So it starts with one singer named Billy Strings. I don't listen to a lot of country and bluegrass music. Perhaps some of you guys do. So anyway, I'm gonna start right here, kind of in kind of the first part of the article, but kind of going down a bit, a couple paragraphs down from the beginning. That's where I'm starting. Billy Strings, whose marquee turn with Thiel opened the Telluride Festival last June, was one of a cohort of youngish, proven yet still rising stars who converged there that also included Molly Turtle, Charlie Crockett, and Sierra Farrell. They are all big fish in the expanding pond of the roots music scene who have been testing the vaster waters of the mainstream, showing up all over late-night TV, movie soundtracks, and music award shows. Get a little drink. It's nighttime, so got my water and my red wine with me. Anyway, endlessly in demand as guest stars on other artists' songs, they are both generating and riding the cultural momentum as American popular music makes one of its regular cyclical swings back toward acoustic instruments and natural voices. The value of community and craft and a heightened sense of connection to the soulful experience and hard-won wisdom of those who lived in the past. Like crafting and sewing and other embodied competences also making a comeback, music handmade by flesh and blood humans on instruments made of wood and metal has acquired special added meaning. It offers a strong contrast to the disembodied digital reality that more and more of us inhabit more and more of the time. We're living in a very algorithmically driven world, says David Macias, president of 30 Tigers, a hybrid record label and management company that gives Americana, alt country, and blues artists extensive control and ownership over their work. He argues that the algorithms which sort the listening public into ever more individualized niches can cut both ways. They can introduce you to new artists, but they can also rob you of the variety of emotional experience. A result, he says, is a hunger for a more authentic view, a more definite emotional experience than commercial country often provides. Roots music has to make its way in from the outside, Macias says, but this type of music, riding a wave, could become mainstream. Right now, commercial country is still dominant, but the momentum is growing. More than one musician I talked to in Telluride told me that country is cool again, usually in a sarcastic tone that dismissed anybody who needs the prevailing cultural winds to shift before deciding it's safe to take an interest in country music. But the expansion of country's footprint and audience is more than a blip of popularity. On the pop end, where Taylor Swift got her start and Beyonce, Ringo Starr, and face tattooed rappers all flourish now. That's funny they bring up Ringo Starr. He's like 80 years old right now. Mainstream country continues its advance into the domains of pop and rock while deepening its awkward embrace of hip hop. I asked Macias and other music business experts to help me understand what's happening on the roots end, where music arising from folk practices mixes with earlier forms of pop music that no longer command the market share they once enjoyed. Though roots is a very slippery idea, as Macias says, the term makes the implicit claim that the music matters not just because of mass popularity, but because it carries cultural memory. Let me see. Oh, I want to see how much longer I want to read. Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna skip around a bit. Okay, because it carries cultural memory. It's undeniable that something's happening, says Keith Levy, an agent who represents Sierra Farrell, the neo-traditional country star, Tyler Childers, and other roots music artists. Because of streaming, audiences keep getting younger, and young people's taste has come around again to music made with banjos and guitars. Taste is on a wheel, and every 10 years or so, the wheel turns in this direction. I'm going to skip. Levy stresses the interplay between these longer wave cycles and taste and technology and the sudden effect of the pandemic on how listeners find and consume music. In 2020, rural listeners especially hadn't really adapted to the digital medium, but in a 40 to 60 day period during the start of the pandemic, they started paying for Spotify subscriptions. Music fans also became more used to unslick videos on YouTube and TikTok that give off what he calls field recording vibes. He cites the example of Sierra Farrell's In Dreams, which has 11 million views on Gems on VHS, a YouTube channel that collects informal acoustic performances. The shift in music delivery went hand in hand with a shift in attitude, also intensified by the pandemic. We went from a hip-hop pop mentality of I'm in the club to I'm stuck at home, Levy says. In that setting, people respond to earnestness and personal connection. A lonelier, more isolated audience responded to musicians with acoustic instruments singing their hearts out. Once your algorithms got the message, you can discover one such artist after another. Let's see. Anyway, I just wanted to read that main part. But so I thought it's an interesting article, and even as a musician, it's something I'm kind of noticing, that I think there is a hunger for live instruments. Because I remember when I was in my band, in the 2010s, I remember that we had to compete a lot with DJs in terms of getting live shows booked, because people weren't like wanting to listen to bands, particularly rock bands. Now I'm seeing more of I think just interest in people wanting to hear people play music on instruments, versus just DJs. I think DJs are still relevant. Like, people are still going to listen to it, but I think there's still a hunger for the intimacy that comes from listening to people play an instrument live in front of you, that is how music has been played for thousands of years. That's how human beings have always played music. Now, let's I'll start with the history of recorded music and weave in, there we go, that's what I'll do. Weave in the let's see. yeah, I'll go with the history of recorded music. So let's see. So let's start with, okay, here we go. Yeah, phonograph. I just want to make sure I have my stuff all lined up that I want to talk about. So I'm in front of my computer and like making sure that um oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Cool. So for thousands of years throughout the world, humans have always played music, and humans have always wanted to listen to other human beings play music. Music is varied across the world from different ethnic groups and cultural groups. Music sounds differently in different parts of the world, and there's a lot of meaning we attach to music. There's spiritual meaning, cultural meaning. Um, Music is more than just passive entertainment. And the way for people to hear music, you would have to hear it from human beings playing live, either in front of you or in like some sort of live auditorium. Um, that is how human beings would have to hear music. Now, if someone, the only other way of preserving and recording music was to write it down on sheet music. That was the only way to preserve music. In addition to passing it down through memorization and orally through passing down by memorization, practice, oral tradition, and then writing it down. That is how music was preserved. In comes the 1800s, the mid to late 1800s. That is when we get the beginning of recording sound. So if you listen to me, my voice, the way I'm talking to you, I'm speaking to you through a microphone. Basically a condenser microphone with a boom arm that I have attached to my desk, and I can move it and stuff, and it has a pop filter, and that microphone is plugged into my computer via a USB cord. And that microphone is able to record and preserve my voice and convert it via an electronic signal onto a digital format, like particularly an MP3 file, WAV file, AIF file. And then I can upload that file onto our podcast website and onto YouTube so you can listen to me, right? That is how you can listen to me and hear my voice and hear me talk to you, right? Which, if you think about it, when you put it that way, that's incredibly remarkable, because the only other way you have to hear me fucking talk is hear me just have a face-to-face conversation. But we're not having a face-to-face conversation. I am just recording this podcast on my microphone that is hooked up to my computer, and that microphone is able to pick up my voice as accurately as it can be, and through an electronic signal channeled through a wire that goes into my computer, it can convert, again, my voice and my recording into a digital audio file that I can upload to my podcast and have you guys listen to it. Now, it didn't always start out that way. How do we get to the point where we can just, anyone with a fucking microphone can like record their voice and upload it and create a podcast, right? How do we get to the point where we can record music and have this thing called a music industry where people, well, it used to be that people would buy records, but now it's through streaming, right? How do we get there? Well, it really starts in 1857 by Edouard de Martinville. He was a French inventor, and his invention was the earliest known device for recording sound, called the phonograph, and it was patented on March 25th, 1857. And basically, you had essentially a large kind of like cone cylinder, and at the end of it there was a stylus, and that stylus would vibrate based on the sound waves that would be picked up by the phonograph, right? And then that stylus would etch the sound waves onto another cylinder, so almost like a stenography in a way. So anyway, the idea was to essentially record sound visually, but the thing is that you couldn't play it back. They didn't find a way to play it back. And so in comes about 20 years later, in 1877, Thomas Edison invented the phonograph. Now, in about 10 years later, in the 1880s, Alexander Graham Bell would make improvements to the phonograph and created the graphophone. So, hit my mic. Sorry, think I may hit my mic. Think I may hit my microphone. Sorry, let me. Anyway, so the phonograph is basically kind of worked the same as a phonograph, where you had like essentially a cone where you would record sound, you speak into it, and then that cone had like a stylus, and it would etch on the sound waves to a wax cylinder. But what was different with Thomas Edison's phonograph was that you could play it back. So you would speak into that cone, and it would etch on the sound waves. Basically, your voice or whatever sound would make that very sensitive stylus vibrate, and those vibrations would basically etch sound waves onto wax cylinder. And then to play it back, you'd have to kind of basically you record sound onto wax cylinder, and then you can kind of play it back by turning a crank but in reverse. So you can both record the sound and play it back, and it would be preserved on wax cylinder. Then wax cylinder, it got basically it changed, so it improved from basically wax cylinder to these compact disc records. So a vinyl disc that came out in the 40s, but before that, the phonograph record, which is basically a disc, it was made of a different material before vinyl. I believe, so I'm looking it up, so that's why you might be hearing me click and stuff. The first disc records, they were made of a different material. I think it was like, I'm trying to look at like what it's like shellac. There we go. Yeah, it's like a shellac, like resin. So anyway, that's what they were made of. And then in the 1940s, the records were made from polyvinyl chloride. So basically vinyl. So in the 40s is when vinyl records were created. But before those discs were made of vinyl, they were made from another material, basically shellac. So shellac is it's a type of resin on trees. So anyway, it's a type of resin, and so that's where it was etched on. So before the shellac disc, it was a wax cylinder. So you went from wax cylinder to the shellac compact disc, and then to vinyl records, right? So that's kind of like the evolution of how like we're able to convert sound into a physical object. First was wax cylinder, then a disc, right? That is when you have the beginning of the music industry, the music recording industry, because you had an industry that could record sound on records and sell them to people who wanted to listen. That right there is the beginning of the recording industry. Anyway, so you go from different eras of recording sound. The first was the acoustic era. So that's basically from the the invention of the phonograph in the late 1870s up to 1924, 1925, around there was the acoustic era, which basically that era was the only way to record sound was acoustically and through a mechanical device, i.e. the phonograph. You have to basically, one person would, either play an instrument or have sound, and then another person would crank, the shaft, which had the wax cylinder, and then the sound waves would be recorded on that wax cylinder. And then once you're done with the cylinder, once you've used it up, then you can play it back, right? So you went from that and then to the disc, and so music was essentially recorded, etched on wax cylinder to disc. Then you get the electrical era, which was you have basically the invention. Let me look up. I'm kind of going through Wikipedia. So the first microphone that was invented. Yeah, there's a lot of these interesting inventions that occur. You have the industrial revolution in the 1800s, and that leads to all these technological innovations. Essentially the first microphone was it was invented right around the same time as the phonograph. Because then you have the invention of the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell. So yeah, you have the invention of the phonograph, the graphophone, and the telephone, microphone. All these inventions are occurring right around the same time of the late 1800s. Basically, the late 1870s to the 1880s, around there. So the condenser microphone, I'm looking this up. The condenser microphone, that was invented in 1916. This is normally you hear me comment on politics and stuff like that. This is other stuff that I like to nerd out on, is music and recording and sound, because I'm a musician, so this is stuff that obviously interests me. But yeah, you see basically around the early 20th century is you see better advancements in microphone technology and electricity. So microphones are able to pick up sound, and they're able to pick up a larger spectrum of sound. And so basically you go from the acoustic era, where it's just the recording sound on the phonograph and using the crankshaft, to now okay, rather than using that, we can now use microphones with wires, right? So the electrical era was from 1925 to around 1945. And by the way, there's this really good kind of short video presentation on YouTube that I thought was really cool. He did a good job of summarizing the history of recorded music. So there's other people who are more well versed in this than I am, especially from a audio engineering perspective. So I'll share that stuff in the show notes. So anyway, you go from then from 1925 to 1945. So the 20s and 30s and half of the 1940s, 20s, 30s, and half of the 1940s, music is recorded electrically through microphones, but they are recorded on again the shellac discs. But the discs they're better quality in terms of the spectrum of sound they could pick up, etc., etc. Then after World War II, around 1945 to 1975. So that post-war era was the era of magnetic tape recording. Now, magnetic tape. The reason why I mentioned World War II, why this is important, magnetic tape was actually invented by the Germans during World War II. Yep. Tape was invented by, magnetic tape was invented by Fritz Flumer. I do not speak German. I could be butchering that name. But anyway, magnetic tape, yeah, that was invented by a German inventor in 1928. He was a German engineer. He invented magnetic tape for recording sound. There's other types of tape, I think like wire tape and stuff like that was experimented with. But anyway, magnetic tape was invented by the Germans in 1928. And that is actually how, the Nazis were able to record their sound. But anyway, it did not become available outside of the Nazi Germany until the end of World War II, the fall of the Nazis, and the Allied forces became aware of magnetic tape recordings after World War II. So, as a result, magnetic tape basically becomes a new standard for recording sound. And magnetic tape leads to a lot of different inventions in terms of preserving both recording music and preserving music. So there's reel-to-reel tape when it comes to recording music, but there's also 8-track tape, compact cassette tapes, VHS. That became a standard format for recording sound for a long time, up until obviously for both music and for film. That was a standard up until the until CDs and DVDs came out and Blu-ray, right? So there's magnetic tape, and I would say like for a huge chunk of recorded music throughout the 20th century was recorded on magnetic tape, and then that tape was converted to different formats that people could listen to, either vinyl record, and it went from vinyl records then to 8-track, then cassette tape, then CDs, and even the editing process with tape, reel-to-reel tape. There's a finite amount of tape you could record, and to edit it, you actually had to people had to actually physically cut the tape and get the right, like, find the right space to edit and stuff like that. It was when people were talking about it, like hearing people talk about like how like tape would be edited, I was like, whoa, holy cow. It was a long process to both record it and edit the tape. So anyway, then around the late 70s, particularly the 80s, you really see the rise of the era we're living in now, which is digital production. Digital production, when it comes to audio and video, it starts to get better and better and better. I was just before recording this, I was watching this video from like 1985 about basically the proliferation of credit card readers, because it used to be with credit cards or any kind of card, you have to like swipe it on this mechanical thing that would like get the numbers, and you have to call the bank and stuff like that. But then it switched to going from that to card reader could read the chip and the magnetic strip on a card. Anyway, so it's around this time, like the 80s is when digital computers start to proliferate more throughout all of our lives, really. I mean, I was born in the late 80s, but I still remember, like, even in the 90s, the computers that came out it was groundbreaking at the time, but it's still, compared to what we have now, fucking slow. It would take a while for computers to get to where they're at now. So anyway, when it came to uh recording and producing music, um there was digital technology available, but people were still using analog tape. Um and it didn't get advanced to the point where around the 2000s, the mid 2000s, it just started getting better and better in terms of being able to edit, record, and different just little tricks you can do when it came to editing and samples and stuff you can do on the computer. And to connect it with, okay, before I go further, I'm going to connect this to the history of Black American music, because Black American music definitely fits into the story of the history of recorded music, particularly in the United States, because some of the earliest recordings of music were blues records. So records, African American blues music, that was among the earliest genre of music that was recorded. Yeah, that was recorded. Particularly around like the 1920s, I believe. You had like blues records being recorded. So yeah, among the first field recordings were of blues records in the Deep South. So there's some very old recordings of old blues records from the 20s that are from those old field recordings. Even old field recordings of African American bluegrass singers, like I believe his name is it's either Uncle Joe Scruggs or John Scruggs. It's Uncle John Scruggs. There we go. Yeah, he was an African American banjo player. And yeah, there's a film of him where he's performing a folk ballad, Little Log Cabin Around the Lane. He was actually born to slave parents in Virginia. And there's footage of him playing that song on banjo on November 8th, 1928. So that footage is almost 100 years old. And he's considered the father of bluegrass music. So, particularly with country music, there is a conscious effort among within white America to disassociate country from its roots in blues music. Blues music is perhaps like one of the oldest forms of folk music in the United States, and it comes from African Americans. And African American music, and I can say this as someone who also does West African drumming, there are real roots to Black American music. So people were taken from Western and Central Africa, and despite the efforts to rob enslaved Africans of their culture in the United States and across the diaspora, enslaved Africans still had cultural knowledge from their homeland that they were still able to preserve wherever they landed in the Americas, but they got preserved in different ways. And so that's why Black culture throughout the diaspora is pretty diverse, because it's the end result of the different ways in which enslaved Africans were able to preserve whatever culture that they're able to remember and preserve under the conditions of enslavement in North America, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. So in this, obviously for this episode, I'm gonna focus more on the United States, especially as a African American myself. So a lot of the musical traits that are preserved in African American music are, blue notes, syncopation, polyrhythms, rhythmic tension, call and response. Those are some musical characteristics that that are part of the DNA of Black music, particularly Black American music, and it transcends genre. So there is a distinct sound to African American music that makes it distinct from other types of music, particularly European white American music, and particularly classical music, and like Black American music is not the same as, like, for example, like Irish Celtic, like Celtic folk music, right? So um, during slavery, so enslaved Africans, they still played music, um, even though drums were banned. Uh, Thanks to the Stoner Rebellion, white people got scared that, like, they thought Africans were using drums to incite war and shit, so they got scared and um, prohibited the use of playing of drums, except in the Congo Square in New Orleans, which is that helped birth jazz music. That was like the one place that enslaved African people, like, they were given a day off on Sunday because of the kind of Catholic rules. Basically, the day off on the Sabbath. So anyway, but the enslaved Africans in Congo Square, they were restricted to that one place to, like, openly practice their, like, traditional African drum and dance, and that had a huge impact on the development of jazz music. So, but other ways that enslaved Africans were able to preserve their African musical forms was through the banjo, the ring shout, Congo Square. Then, after slavery is abolished, African Americans are able to practice their music more openly. So then you get, I would say blues music is probably older than the Civil War, but what we call the blues as a term, begins right around the time of the end of the Civil War. But I mean, you could argue that blues music, it goes back to slavery, and then and actually the real roots of blues music, which some I'd like to emphasize on this podcast, does go back to West Africa, particularly in terms of the scale of the notes, blue notes, and the flat third, seventh, and even fifth notes that give blues a distinct sound that is different than definitely European string music. Like, that's what. So anyway, blues' ancestral roots are West Africa. So anyway, so you have blues, ragtime, gospel. These are genres that evolved within Black America. So blues, ragtime, gospel, jazz, R&B, soul, rock and roll, funk, disco, house, techno, then rap / hip hop. I mean, hip hop is more of a larger subculture. Rap is a genre of music that is one part of the many elements of hip hop, like, DJing, breakdancing, graffiti, etc. So, now let's tie this all. I'll tie this all together in terms of the history of recorded music, and then why, connected to this article, and like why I think a lot of not all modern music, I'm just saying, like, a lot of music, I think computers have sucked the soul out of a lot of music, just in terms of the technology that's available. Anyway, hip hop music, that, like I said before, hip hop really emphasized the use of creative sampling of older music. So a lot of the music that rap music sampled was definitely funk music, particularly James Brown's drummers, like Jacko Starks and Clyde Stubblefield. Their drum grooves were essentially the foundation of hip hop drumming, because their drum grooves are sampled the most. So like, yeah, so old funk records, R&B, jazz fusion, those are a lot of the records that were sampled in hip hop music, and it was a creative use of sampling, but that's the music that was sampled. So a lot of these hip hop producers, they were just nerds. They were just fans of older black music. They just loved, old R&B, funk, soul, jazz fusion records. Like, they were nerds with that stuff. A lot of them were just crate diggers, so they would just dig in a lot of their competition among themselves is like who could find the most obscure vinyl record, be able to listen to it, and then find a part that they could isolate and repeat and sample. And it was around that time that you had drum machines and use of MPCs. So like you had like these kind of like small music workstations where you'd have a drum machine and you have like these sample pads, and that's like how these producers would make their beats. But even those tools were still kind of analog. So even if you turn what's called quantizing, so quantizing is when you play a drum groove and it's snapped to like a perfect metronomic grid. So that's one kind of innovation, particularly the invention of the drum machine and the spread of it in the 1980s. Is that like what became more standard was drum grooves have to be put to what's called a grid or quantized. And so a real drummer, a real live human being drummer, drummers do not play to what's called quote unquote perfect time. Our tempos will shift. Even the best drummers do not all play in quote unquote perfect time. We will naturally drift. We shift the tempo a little bit because we're human beings, right? So the advent of a lot of this better computer technology is that it changed how people would produce music. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff I'm bringing up, but it's all I want to tie it all together. So like I said, hip hop that emphasized the use of sampling, and so you have that, and then the technology when it came to computer technology and digital audio production. Over time, it just got better. For example, I remember when GarageBand came out on Apple. It was around the mid 2000s. When I remember it came out when I was in high school, and we had like a video production class, and we would like mess around with it. And it would have a library sample of different sounds and different, basically like different musical sounds, and you could kind of just loop the sounds and kind of stack them together, and you would have like you could make a song basically. So you wouldn't have to play an instrument at all. You would just like, oh, this is large sample library. You can just arrange the sounds. So you have a different, like a library of different drum beats, different guitar sounds, different bass sounds, piano sounds, etc. Like you can go on and on. And you could rearrange those sounds and together where it could sound like a complete song, even though you yourself did not play those sounds. You could rearrange it and then create your own song without having had to play an actual instrument. Over time, GarageBand, I noticed over the years, got better. I still use GarageBand, but I don't use a sample library. Actually, the way I am recording this podcast episode, my solo episodes, I use Logic Pro. So I have Logic Pro and I have GarageBand. For my outro and my intro songs, that is me playing those instruments. I recorded them on microphones, and I don't have like I have these interfaces, but the more like these portable Zoom recorders that have microphone inputs, so they act as both a recorder and audio interface. So an audio interface is basically it's a device where you connect it to your computer and has these microphone inputs that you plug your XLR cable microphones in. So there's a microphone with an XLR cable. You plug it into the audio interface, and that interface connects to your computer, so you could basically convert the sound you get from your microphones to a digital signal. The microphone I'm using doesn't really need an audio interface. It just it has a USB cord, and you just plug it in. But most microphones, particularly most standard quality microphones, you have an XLR cable. So there's no XLR cable input on the computer, so you need an audio interface to connect the microphone to the audio interface, and then the audio interface to the computer. So anyway, But the way I recorded that, I recorded those. That's me playing drums, and I recorded them at home and myself, and I was able to mix the recordings myself on Logic Pro. So that is how I use this technology, and the benefit is that it makes it easy for independent musicians like myself to record high quality demos. Now, if I wanted to release my own album and particularly get the mastering done, it is better to go to a studio and have like a professional do that, because they have better trained ears when it comes to hearing certain things, and they can master it so like it sounds consistent and good on all different listening platforms. So I have been in a studio before. I noticed like to record drums. Drums are among the most difficult to record because you have a large drum kit with different microphones and all that. So anyway, what this technology has done is like it's made it easy for people like myself to record my own stuff and put it out there. Even if I don't want to go to a studio and I can just record my own stuff and just put it out there, is way easier versus going to a studio with very good analog equipment to record music, very high quality stuff to record good quality, get a good recording. You have to pay hundreds to thousands of dollars for that. Like, studio time is expensive. And so during particularly the magnetic tape era of recording music, because you had a finite amount of tape and studio time costs money, musicians had to nail their part before they went into the studio to record anything. So the philosophy during that time was to record the best performance, because tape is finite, it's time consuming and labor intensive to edit it, and it costs money. So you can't waste time with like shitty performances that you have to keep editing. You have to get the best performance on tape, edit it, kind of have it audio engineer mix it, and then you go from there. And then you get the master recording, and then every other like records that are sold are copies of that master recording. Master recording is like the recording of the music that's done in the studio, and then the records that are sold are just copies of that master recording. I oh my gosh, I feel like there's so much more I can go into when it comes to the music industry and how this stuff is done. I will definitely return to this topic because I think it's worth fleshing out. Anyway, with digital audio production, with stuff like auto-tune, Melodyne, which is more pitch correction, sampled sounds, sample libraries, quantizing of drum beats. What that has done, what I would argue, is that it's made it so that you really don't need human beings to play music or perform music. Because on the one hand, if you have someone perform music, you can just edit their voice. Like, for example, if someone's a shitty singer or they can't fucking sing, like, you could just do pitch correction, auto tune, and then boom. Like, no one's gonna care. Rather than hire a live drummer, you can have a drum machine. Or a lot of times what I've heard is that drummers will perform, but rather than capture that drummer's performance, they just take previous drum samples and put that sample over what they played, and then like snapped the drummer's performance to a grid, which is basically perfect time. So the grid, what we really mean is like metronomic time, like playing a rhythm to that. So that you convert that to what's called a grid, and It's funny. I'm looking at the recording right now on my Logic, and it shows. Yeah. So, uh, basically, the idea is to put a drummer's performance in what's called perfect time. And the idea of perfect time, the idea of the grid, it really doesn't fucking exist. It's this thing that got created by the computer. And so, as a result, quantizing is basically making a live human drummer sound more and more like a drum machine, or more robotic. Let's put it that way. It's more robotic. Because real drummers, we shift a little bit. Doesn't mean we go all the way off, but it's never exactly in perfect time. It's never exactly in perfect time. We may drift a little bit, but it's never exactly in perfect time. The grid snaps a drummer's performance into perfect time. So, as a result, the drummer's performance, from an engineer's perspective, for some producer perspective, it sounds like, oh, this is better because it's easier to edit. But really, what happens is that you kind of lose a little bit of the humanity when you edit to that extent. So, kind of going back to what I said earlier about GarageBand, like when I was first messing around with it, that sample library, I didn't have to play any instruments. I could just like, oh, it's a bunch of like sounds here. I could just stitch together. Don't even have to play an instrument. And it's to the point now where there's a lot of music that's out now that, you know, the human contribution is kind of minimal. I'm not saying that like human beings have stopped performing or playing music. This is far from it. People are, I think, still going to play music because it's fun and it's how humans have expressed themselves. But the nature of in which music is recorded has changed significantly. And it's to the point where computers, I would argue, have sucked a lot of the human element, the soul and the humanity out of a lot of music. And that's why I think, like, when people say, oh man, music doesn't sound good these days, like, that's not just an old man yelling at clouds statement. Because it's even to the point where a lot of younger people like older music. Because especially with streaming, you have, like, you can listen to all kinds of music. And yeah, there are younger people who like older music. Like, they're listening to, you know, maybe Dua Lipa or Sabrina Carpenter. But then they'll listen to, you know, maybe the Beatles, right? Or some older records, like classical music or jazz. Like, oh, well, like they'll listen to it and be like, wait, this music sounds pretty freaking good. And onto that point, there's actually a record where I think it's by Ted Gioia, where he said that old music is doing better than newer music. So again, it isn't just an old man yelling at clouds statement. It's something real. Yeah, I would argue that I think computers through I think that the technology for digital audio production is almost too perfect. It's almost too good in a way, because over time has gotten better to the point where it's almost too fucking good. And I think that that technology has made it way too easy to suck the humanity out of music. And you're kind of losing the magic of what makes music special. And now it's to the point where AI is able to make music with very little human input. And the kind of digital audio production that I mentioned is, it's not just like electronic music, because electronic music, like, you still have human beings like performing and making stuff, but it's just you're using synthesizers and different types of sounds, but like you still have human beings performing. But with the technology that's out now, when it comes to the production end of music, there's a lot of stuff on the production end with these what we call like digital audio workstations. There we go, DAWs, digital audio workstations, and even MPCs, like then samplers and sample libraries and quantization and auto tune, melodyne, pitch correction. Um, we can go down the list. There's so much really good digital audio production that you almost don't need a human being to play a live instrument, or you barely need a human being to sing that well. Um, and now we're at the point where AI can make fucking music, which I think ties into, this article about why genres like country and Americana are making a resurgence, because there still is that hunger for people to listen to music played by human beings with live instruments. I think that hunger is always going to be there, and I think now we're seeing a resurgence of it because, especially now with where we're at now with this era is it's not just digital audio production, but streaming. Music is being listened to digitally. Like people aren't listening to music on CDs anymore. It's through, and there's barely any purchases of I guess like Apple like songs on iTunes. It's all everything's to streaming. And now I think now there's a backlash to it because vinyl records are making a comeback. And I think there are more people because with streaming you don't own the music. You don't own it. Like when you your subscriptions on Spotify, you're paying for access to a large library of music, but you don't own it. It's the same with Netflix or any other subscription. You don't own the stuff on Netflix. It's just you own access to that library of TV and movies. So I think there's a need, a hunger. I think now where I think people are seeing this AI bubble, and there's some real disenchantment with where we're at in society when it comes to culture and AI. There is this disconnection from real authentic art because everything we're consuming is so fucking digitally produced and digitally consumed, and you further remove yourself from the humanity that creates that art in the first place. I think a comparison I would make between what's happened to music when it comes to movies and film, the advent of fucking CGI and shit. I mean, now there's a Terry Norwood's a fucking AI actress. This is where we're at. So yeah, we're at the point when it comes to culture and music where their technology is almost too perfect. And I'm not saying that some of the technology that even I use, I don't think is bad. I don't think for example, I don't think digital audio workstations are bad. I think they're good. I use them. I use Logic. I use GarageBand. They work for independent musicians like myself to record our own stuff without having to go into a studio. And it even helps us record good demos for when we want to go to a studio. We have something to work with for when we go in, right? I like that about Logic and GarageBand. Even some of the EQing I like doing on that's usually what I do on DAWs is I record it and then I maybe cut some stuff out. With my outro, I was using another Zoom recorder as a room mic, and so because I hit record on the different recorders, they didn't sync up, so I had to sync up the recording. So stuff like that, syncing up tracks, cutting stuff, EQing either hearing the mid, the lows, the highs, and evening those out, smoothing them out, and stuff like that. I like what that technology is able to do. I have used it a lot. I have found it incredibly freaking helpful. I don't use sample libraries. I just use it to record and mix my own stuff and polish it up and, make it, sound decent. And sometimes there's interesting plugins when it comes to different EQ settings that are helpful, right? But I think as someone with this experience of having been in a studio and now recording and mixing my own stuff, I go in with a mentality where when I record something, I want to record my best performance. I don't go into want to edit. I'm not going in to edit the fuck out of my performance, because then it's like I want to record me. And if you guys hear me, you hear me. You don't hear R2D2. You don't hear like something fake or too overproduced. I want you to hear me in like the best performance of it. To hear my best performance. Anyway, I think that's it. That's pretty much all I have to say. And I think that I've tied in all those different elements of paying homage to D'Angelo, the history of African American music, and particularly the history of recorded music. And I think there's this real need for this real hunger among people for music played by live human beings, and the connection that's fostered through that. Because I do think there's a real organic connection when you hear human beings play live right in front of you, because there's an intimacy there. There's a connection there. When someone is playing an instrument in front of you, they, like, when you get to a certain point of playing an instrument, if you played it long enough, definitely if you've played it as long as I have, or much longer, that instrument becomes an extension of you. And so you are able to express yourself through that instrument naturally. Obviously, there's like practicing technique and getting better and better, but at some point, if you played an instrument long enough and you're really dedicated, that instrument is part of you. That instrument is an extension of you. And there's something special about that. To hear a human being play an instrument, and that instrument is an extension of themselves. Or to hear a very compelling singer who can emote through their own voice and make you feel something. Like, that's what I find beautiful about music. As both a listener of music and as someone who plays music. And definitely someone who plays music. I know the blood, sweat, tears, the soul that goes into making music and performing in front of people. And seeing shit get edited and to the point where everything's so hyper produced, I always think, okay, are you just sucking the humanity out of this thing, out of music? Anyway, I'll end on that note. Music is beautiful. Music is sacred. It makes us feel something. And one person who did that for a lot of people was D'Angelo. Yeah, man. Rest in peace, brother. Rest in peace, D'Angelo. Yeah, your absence is definitely felt, but hope you're resting wherever you are. But the man left a real important legacy, and I wanted to pay homage to him and just say what an amazing piano player he was. Oh my God, just beautiful. And again, I just think the computers have sucked the soul out of music, and there's a lot of music that is to the point where it's so overproduced. To me, it's like, it's music, but it's missing the humanity. And I think in the time we're in right now, that kind of humanity in all forms of art, but I'll focus on the art that is near and dear to me, music. We definitely need more of that in music, especially in the time that we're living in. Anyway, on that note, thank you for listening to this episode. If you like it, become a subscriber. Patreon.com/Real Sankara Hours. $5 a month gets you access to bonus episodes. $3 a month, you become a patron, but you don't get access to bonus episodes. But anyway, yeah. Take care of yourselves. Yeah. Yeah, take care of yourselves. Love you guys. Keep the faith. Stay dangerous. Peace.